Interrupting, Chuck, sorry about that, just because it struck 7. We're going to call the school committee meeting to order. It is 7 p.m. on the 23rd of January, and we're going to start with our public hearing, then I'll go through the rest of the agenda after that. So, Aaron, do you have a motion for us, please?
Motion to open the public hearing for fiscal year 26 budget.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. We'll start, public hearing is roll call, so Chuck?
Here.
Carla?
Here.
Sean? Aye.
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Tom, yes. And so we are now in public hearing. We do have one member of the public here, and I was betting that you had at least one thing to say. We appreciate that feedback. So
This
Dr.
one or that
Coram?
one?
You only get one thing.
One thing. Oh, okay.
Andy, can you turn us down? We're a little hot, if you don't mind as well.
I mean, I can have my minute to speak at FinCom as well, but Jeffrey Coram, Ridge Road. If I can only get one thing to say, I just would commend the Superintendent and Director of Finance for presenting a level service budget despite the cost pressures. I am going to have a few more things. I think last year, well, in last year's budget book, at least the version that ended up in the warrant, there was an appendix of acronyms, which is not in the draft budget. So if we could get that back in. There was also mention of full day, or like a permanent substitute for each of the buildings, who would, and the justification being that, that person could help with, observations and, something came up in the middle of the day. And I wonder if that's something that you've seen working successfully in other districts, how that worked, whether it saved money, whether it didn't save money, but really helped out with, with those evaluations or something. I guess I should be addressing my comments to the chair of the super.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I also had some questions in the administration section. There's a line item for advertising, which is different from hiring and recruiting. So I was just curious what that line item incurs. I also noticed equipment dropped by 25% versus last year, and then postage and publications went up by 56% and 25%. The dollar amounts are small, but I'm just curious, is there something particular this year that we're doing more? And maybe it's to, inform the public about the Killam School project or something, that would be foreseen. So those were my comments for the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coram. Dr. Lecheska, do you want to answer, or are you able to answer? Should we take it away?
Do we want to?
It's a public hearing, so we can respond if we're ready. If we want to take it away and say we'll answer as part of the questions next week, that's fine.
I think we can answer I'm happy to answer as part of the questions. Right? I mean, I can give a quick update on a couple of them, and then we can get more detailed answer on them too. The one of the building substitutes, we've heard from, there's very few districts who have a full-time permanent substitute that we know of, especially in the league and regionally, in each of their buildings. With that said, those buildings who have that said that has been significant aid to be able to not have to pull people every day, sort of as a first line of defense. With that said, that has been lower on our sort of budget request list given the cost, which would be what we've allocated, what other districts do as a bachelor's one generally, so around $60,000. And then, having that just hasn't been the highest priority for us to be able to, is what we thought is the most strategic investment. With that said, we haven't sort of run enough of analysis maybe, which we could for the budget, for the FAQs around how much are we paying for subs and sort of what's the, the amount there that is the trade-off there. I think that's a good point, but we just haven't found that $60,000 per building to be feasible at this point. In terms of postage and publications, that is what we thought was going to be the cost around the community report that's going to be mailed out. Just actually tomorrow will be dropped in mailboxes too. So I'll go back and double check on sort of why was there an allocation, maybe why is it higher than last year, but we know that that's what we think reflects the true cost this year. Advertising, that a lot of that was put in was within our HR department. Our HR department has been doing more to try to be kind of forward-facing for a lot of different events, particularly at some of the recruitment fairs, some of the diversity recruitment fairs, so we can put some more information in the FAQs around sort of what are we expecting, actually how that money will be used for the year to come as well. Anything else? Appendix for the acronyms, I love that idea. I feel like in education, a lot of people need like the quarterback cheat sheet on their hand with the acronyms, and I think that's a good piece of feedback, so thank you.
If I could just follow up on the advertising. I mean, there is a separate line item for hiring and recruiting.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand. know why it would be split up separately as advertising. If it is HR advertising as part of the recruiting, then would it make more sense to clump it together? Is it advertising for school choice that we're, sending out some other different advertising or something else?
Great, thank you for clarifying that too, and we'll have more information at the FAQ. Thank you. Good questions.
Good questions that I don't think anything you said or I said was caught on Zoom, unfortunately, because I forgot to unmute the neat pad, but hopefully at least others caught it. So we can recap that if we
It'll
need
be
to.
covered.
Yes, it'll be covered as part of the FAQ as well. Any other comments on the public forum or from the public on the public forum? So we got our one.
Got our one.
All right.
Appreciate you
Thank
being
you,
here.
Dr.
Appreciate
Corum.
your
We
engagement.
appreciate it, exactly. All right, do we have a motion?
Motion to close the public hearing for the fiscal year 26 budget and return to regular session.
Seconded by Sean, and we'll do roll call for that as well. Chuck?
Yes.
Carla? Sean?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Tom? Yes, and the public hearing is now closed. Okay, so we'll move through the rest of the regular agenda, and then, go from there. So we will have any additional public comment, if there is any, for anything that is not on the agenda. Since the rest of the budget discussion for the board is on the agenda, any other questions can be part of that conversation as well. So if there's anything else, we can have that now. We will, unfortunately, are not going to be able to have our focus on excellence because the student who was supposed to come is unfortunately sick. So we're missing our singing of some of the Frozen songs that were supposed to be coming to us today, but hopefully we can reschedule that at some point in the near future. We do have our consent agenda, and we'll have some reports. A few of those are not going to happen as well, so we'll work our way through that. Presuming our legal counsel is able to join, I've just pinged him, he should be joining shortly. We're going to have a review of, what elected and appointed officials' advocacy rates are for ballot initiatives. A lot of the stuff already has gone through KSBC, but we wanted to make sure, especially as some of us are elected only versus appointed, we have different rights, and we wanted to make sure we're clear on what we can and can't do. And so our legal counsel is going to join us for that discussion. Following that, any further conversation or questions from the committee on the FY26 budget or the public, as the case might be, and then we'll adjourn. Okay? So with that said, any public comment? All right, seeing none. We have a motion on the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Chuck. All in favor? All opposed? And it passes. I didn't ask for any feedback, sorry about that, but normally you guys don't have feedback. So another grant in there is good to see as well. So that passes 5-0. And we'll move on to reports. And Phil, do you want to give a report from the car? I have to ask you to unmute. I can't unmute you for this.
All right.
There you go.
Am I?
You are good.
Me now?
Yes, we can, sir.
I don't really have anything to report, so I guess that's my report.
All right.
Drive safely.
Drive safely, Phil. All right.
I'll be home in a few minutes.
All right, great. Dr. Milichewski, anything for you?
Great. The only thing is just a quick thank you. So as we're going through the budget process, I'd obviously like to give a huge thank you to Phil Littlehale for how he's jumped into the community over the last month or so and got acclimated to our community, and I think putting together I think a really encouraging FY26 budget. So huge thank you to Phil for his entry to the community. Also, obviously behind the scenes, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Kate Finnegan, kind of an unsung hero on our team too. So we know that during a time of transition, she stepped into the director of finance role, but also now is just behind the scenes, constantly supporting the work of the team, in particular our finance department. So she is excellent at what she does. I don't think we could find a better assistant business manager. So I just wanted to make sure that she gets some of that public recognition that we know she deserves. So she's doing a really amazing job. So huge thank you to Kate.
Great, thank you. Any questions? No? Moving on to liaison reports, and we'll start down at the end. Chuck?
So I don't have a liaison report, but I kind of mentioned informally to a few that I should formally say that I've decided not to pull papers to run for reelection, and it's time to let some other people step up, and I really have appreciated all the different members and staff I've worked with over the years, and this group we're with now certainly doesn't take a backseat to any of the, I really have enjoyed working with all of you and the engagement and the thoughtfulness, and look forward to watching from the sidelines, so.
You're not used to watching from the sidelines, buddy, except it's for your coaching, so
Yeah.
that's a different case.
Well, I've been yelled at for running on the field before.
Well, Chuck, I think I'll just say it quickly. I think I appreciate your 18-plus years, 18 on the school committee plus 6 on finance committee, 9 on finance committee. And who knows how many years on town meeting as well during that period of time, or maybe before and after. Hopefully you're not done with town meeting. Maybe you're not done with other things, but thank you for all the time. I appreciate as well, when I joined this committee, the mentorship and guidance that you were able to provide me as we went through things. I know sometimes I ran too fast and you hadn't helped me slow down, but I appreciate that, and I appreciate your engagement over all this time, so thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Carla.
I will say that if I have to say a word that describes you, to me, you are the great collaborator, that you always are trying to find consensus among the board. And I've often accused you in private of giving up your vote just to make sure when you were the chair, giving up your vote because you always wanted to follow the consensus of the board. So you've taught me a lot. I appreciate everything you've done for us as a group for the schools. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I wasn't prepared to do this tonight. I thought we might do it on your last night, but I'm going to speak. So to piggyback on some of what Tom was saying, I really appreciate your support and mentorship. You were a massive support to me when I got elected 5 years ago, and considering the three of us got elected at the craziest time, it was so nice to have like your calm and your expertise guiding us through that COVID period. And I really appreciate that you have always approached everything like very level-headed and very, very student and staff focused. I've felt that 100% from you every time. So I've considered you a mentor and a role model. So I thank you for all of that. And 18 years is tremendous. So thank you so much.
I'm gonna hold my warm and fuzzy until we get close to the end here. However, I'm a little bit excited about the fact that we have a first person to call when we need a community member on an ad hoc committee. So, we know you won't go far despite stepping back from the regular grind here. So
Get my handicap.
there you go.
Like Aaron said too, I was not prepared to give my thank you remarks to Chuck tonight, but I will, I'll save them for later. But I want to share just quickly as I echo a couple of things. I deeply appreciate, Chuck, not only his impact in the community over the past couple of decades, but also just for me the last 4 years, what you've meant for me as a thought partner, a mentor, a resource. I don't think could be kind of emphasized enough, especially for a first-year superintendent who's walking into all sorts of different things that are unknown. A couple of lessons just I took away from you is one, like Evelyn said, how to find middle ground on really challenging, sticky issues in the process of building coalitions, building, trying to build consensus when you're working with kind of difference of opinions and viewpoints, and how to hear people, but arrive at something that can move people forward. I think is something that you model really well, that I learned by watching you. 2, how to both hold someone accountable and also support them at the same time. I felt that throughout my time as the tenure superintendent, Chuck held me to a really high bar for expectation, but also at the same time felt like he was in my corner, would have my back when things got, and that's a lesson that's important for any, evaluator, any leader to be able to do both of those things well. 3, I always like right when I started, he said, you got to get in there, you got to take a swing. He's like, sometimes you're going to miss, but you have to get in there and don't be afraid to take a swing. And I think that knowing that, someone is there wanting you to put your neck out there and fight the hard fights and do your best to try to, get in there when things are sticky, and they'll still be there supporting you, meant a lot for me in terms of coming in and trying to lead with confidence and conviction on different things. So I'll have much more to say before, but I just wanted to quickly, as others mentioned it tonight, just deep appreciation for you, for what you've done for the community and for what you've done for me as a leader too. So thank you.
All right. Now, we got a hard act to follow with the rest of the liaison reports. Carla?
Well, I'll give you good news.
Good stuff.
So we had a meeting, a KSBC meeting last night for Killam, and we got our total project budget that we will vote on next Monday, 3rd?
Yep.
2 Mondays from now, if it's the
2 Mondays
3rd.
from now. But I will just give some numbers, and hopefully not to confuse the issue. Our total project budget right now is at $130 and change million. The good news is our construction costs were estimated at $107 million, and they're now down to $101 million. So that was really good news. But I think our best news is that the portion of our funding coming from the MSBA is $42 million. And up till even last week, I was telling everybody it was $32 million. Going through this whole estimating process, uncovered other areas that could be deemed as participating by the MSBA. So 42, we will get, if we continue with this project, we will get $42 million from the MSBA. So the cost to the town before incentives will be about $88 million, which is huge, because I think people are counting on $100 million. The number that will be on the ballot for our vote will be $130 million. But the true cost to us before incentives will be about $88 million, which is like really good news.
And incentives being things like Inflation Reduction Act and things like that we can apply for from a federal grant perspective.
The Inflation Reduction Act, we will bring on a tax expert, because there are different, at different levels for different pots of money we can put in requests. So we'll be on top of
Try and
that.
bring it down.
Exactly. But we'll have to pay our whole bill, and then after prove that we complied, and then get those incentives back.
Just help potentially pay the bill down faster.
Yes.
Sure, Chuck, go ahead.
You mentioned construction costs, so I deal with that in the insurance business a lot because I do a lot of real estate. And that's been sticker shock for a lot of our clients because of the construction, because of inflation. Have you said you've seen that come down?
So back in, I want to say it was October, the MSBA increased their amount of reimbursable, amount of money per square foot costs.
So the costs from the contractors aren't coming down, the reimbursement's just going up.
The reimbursement has gone up. The cost from the contractors, escalation will always take place.
Yeah.
And that's why we're really looking at our schedule, and as I mentioned last time, going to propose to try and condense the schedule a little bit because of that inflation to save significant money.
I think what Chuck's referring to, you referenced 107 coming down to 101, which I think just reflects a refinement of the estimates. It's not, the cost of lumber came down 6% or something like that. Yeah, it's just a refinement of the estimates as we got further along in the schematic design.
And what about interest rates? How does that impact everything? Is that?
It impacts the cost of borrowing, for
Right.
sure, yeah.
Once we realize what we have to borrow, Sharon Engstrom will look at what our borrowing capacity will be. But going back to that 107 million down to 101, the real reason, in addition to refining our estimates and taking our design further down the path, is that we had budgeted originally a full geothermal HVAC system, and now we only have a half geothermal. So that cost went down because of that, but that takes a lot of that $5 million hit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, this is like small change for 88 million, but the 2.5 that town meeting already approved, is that on top of 130? Is that part of the 130? Like, we've already sort of allotted that?
That's a great question.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Because we're under budget on
Well, we
that.
talked
We're
about
under
that at
budget.
town meeting and whether that was reimbursable or not.
That is reimbursable. We have been getting reimbursements from the state. If you said, give me an answer right now, I would say it was separate.
Okay.
And that moving forward, because that was for the, feasibility study, schematic design. So at this point in time, it's moving forward.
Gotcha.
Into more inclusive design and stuff like that.
Okay. Sean, any other updates on your side?
Report.
Aaron, any updates on your side?
No report.
And I have no report as well. Okay, so that means we can move on in the agenda, and we will move to our new business, which is the review of elected and appointed officials' advocacy rights for ballot initiatives. And I'm going to change the focus and bring Justin, legal counsel, on, the chat here. And Justin, thank you for joining us. So just as background for the committee, Aaron and I were talking with Dr. Milczewski, and there was a request to understand, what rights and abilities we have as elected officials with regards to advocacy for Killam. There was already a conversation at KSBC about what they could do as an appointed body. And I've asked Justin to kind of talk to us a little bit about what we can do, where we can do it as elected officials, and potentially, Carla and Sean, in your case, if you wanted to participate, how you would do that in the context of the fact that you're appointed but also elected. So, Justin, I don't know if you want to start from there and just provide an outline, and then the committee can ask questions or what. So I leave it to you to get us going.
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs
Yes.
up?
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. Well, nice to be with you tonight. I'm Justin Gomes, an attorney that works with Colby Bryant, who I understand normally assists Reading in related to matters like this. She asked that I step in for her because she was unavailable, but nonetheless, it's an issue that I have done some work on in our office. So just sort of outlining the landscape for us, what we're actually meaning when we talk about advocacy for public employees, right? Some of the many factors that we consider is this a action that's being taken by a public body as a whole, individual elected official in their individual capacity outside of the public body, right? I understand that there's the complication here as well with the individual elected official, school member, committee member, who also serves in an appointed role, right? And then regardless of who's taking the action, whether or not public resources are being used, right? What information is actually being conveyed, and what the actual type of advocacy is, right? Whether it's a bright line statement advocating one position over another, or engaging in fundraising activity, for example. So the main statutes that govern us are conflict of interest law and then campaign finance law, whereas we're in the realm of a ballot initiative, right, potentially, where we have both at stake, right? Both campaign finance and conflict of interest laws attached to our analysis. I've taken a look at one of the previous guidance documents that was sent out, and I'm prepared to answer any questions that you may have on that one. I'm not sure how you'd like to go about it. I'll kick it to the committee as to whether or not you'd like me to answer any specific questions as to things that you're contemplating or may want to do, or where you think generally is appropriate in these circumstances.
Aaron, did you have anything in particular you wanted to dive in on?
So I just wanted to clarify, in this instance, 4 of us are just considered elective, and only Carla and Sean are considered appointed, even though we all impact policy?
Yeah,
Does
Carla,
that hear me?
Carla
Sorry.
and Sean.
Is that,
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's my question. I'm not on the Killam School Building Committee. I am on the school committee. Am I considered, do I follow the guidelines for non-policy making, or I follow the guidelines for policy making?
so if you're looking, you'd be following the guidelines for a policy-making elected official.
Okay.
That makes sense? Whereas you're a non-appointed
Okay.
individual.
But they're considered appointed because they're on the building committee?
They are considered both. They're considered appointed and elected.
Okay.
So if you look at some of the guidance documents, they run a scenario by the reader. One of them, particularly the ones that relate to fundraising, right? Soliciting gifts related to a ballot initiative or a campaign, or hosting a fundraiser, for example. The restrictions that an elected official has are assuming that they're purely an elected official, you don't have public employment somewhere else in your life. The restrictions of an elected official don't exist compared to somebody that has a appointed position as well as an elected position.
I would read the KSBC role as non-policy making, right? They don't make policy, they're working through the whole building process, but they're a non-policy making board, as opposed to the school committee as a policy making board. It's one of our core responsibilities is policy making, but then we're in the elected category, right? It's not even, there isn't even an elected policy making conversation, it's just elected, period. So is there any, do you agree with that assertion, Justin, as I just stated it, or?
I would. And, when you're an elected official, elected officials are giving the most leeway when it comes to advocacy, whether that be making public statements, actual, going out there and campaigning, knocking on doors, for example, or fundraising. And the reason for that is because there's an expectation that you're going to take positions on matters among public issues. So you are given leeway. Where you run into issues potentially is if you were to use any public resources that you have access to by virtue of your elected position in the process of that advocacy. I'll give you some examples of where the public body or members wouldn't want to go, right? You wouldn't want to be using your public email to engage in that advocacy. You wouldn't want to be using listservs that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Old cases used to reference people going into coffee rooms and making flyers and using the same, the more traditional forms of resources that they otherwise have access to by virtue of their elected position. Those are things that the committee or committee members would do, and that would run them afoul of both laws.
So Justin, let me clarify, I think where Tom was going, because I actually read this differently than how I heard him articulate it, and I'm not sure I heard you directly react to it. The policymaking versus non-policymaking distinction, the Killam School Building Committee, I believe is a policy, for the purposes of the legal guidance here, I believe is a policymaking, entity, right? Like we are hiring, we're hiring designers and we're making decisions about the design, and they're not policies, but.
Is it more operational?
But I don't think the distinction is literally, are you writing policies versus are you making decisions on behalf of the entity? I believe is, how I read the paragraph here, where it says, the public employee actively participates in determining the agency's policies or plans. our plans around who to hire as a designer, around what building to build. The school building committee is making those, is making those determinations, and Carla and I are participating in that as voting members. So I read that to say that it is a policy-making body, and we are in a policy-making position as voting members versus non-policy-making, a non-policy-making appointee would be, the superintendent, for example, who's appointed to that but doesn't have a vote, doesn't have a vote in the decisions that we make. Am I reading that the right way?
Yes, I think you are reading that the right way, and I apologize if I confused Tom's question. The policy making, right, I think that it can be widely interpreted and would encompass the members of the committee, the building committee, if that makes sense. As well, the superintendent could be considered a policy making or appointed authority policymaker. Does that make sense?
It does.
It's my understanding that basically the whole committee, the building committee and the superintendent and the town manager and assistant town manager are appointed policy makers. And in addition, we're elected officials, which seems to have the most freedom.
Yeah.
Right, it's the least restrictive, except for around funding, even though you can contribute your own funding.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Justin, I have a question. So we're talking a lot about mainly two members of the committee who are on the school building committee plus the school committee. Why can't they simply, when they're say, report out, I'm speaking as a school committee member and not as a member of the school, I mean, who's gonna call them out on that when they're on both boards? I mean, let's get down, let's get serious about it, really? I mean.
We live in Redmond.
Remember
If we live in red.
The truth, though, is that the restrictions for us as appointed policymakers are not that different, right? I mean, it says outside of work hours. Well, we're not employed. We don't have specific work hours. And it says unless the ballot question is related to the official's responsibilities, and of course it is in this case. So we functionally have the same restrictions. Like we can use our position either as a school committee member or a school building committee member to write a letter to the editor endorsing the ballot question, for instance, right? Is how I read this table. So, the primary restrictions here really are about the use of public resources.
Right.
And the only one that is, I think borderline is the use of the title. And according to this table, we can even do that as long as it's on the matter of this ballot question, which clearly is related to our responsibilities.
Yeah, the guardrails are meant to be around use of public resources and what staff does, what hired employees do, correct? Not as much elected.
Fundraising too.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's the only guardrails, because it's also
Fundraising.
there are certain guardrails, particularly as it relates to fundraising and campaign finance, right, and using your titles. I think that the Office of Campaign Finance has pays greater scrutiny if you were to be using your position as an appointed authority or an employee in that context, because there are in fact some bright line rules. You can't engage in fundraising activity as an appointed employee. So that's certainly a difference outside of just using public resources. I'm not sure if I caught the rest of your question, the previous question, whether or not there was any particular differences. I would agree with you that because this topic is within the scope of both positions, you really do have a lot of latitude to engage in statements and a certain level of advocacy over the particular issue.
Yeah, I don't think there was a question. I think it was more an assertion of what you just said. So I'm glad to hear that. I guess the one other thing that's not super clear to me is just the work hours piece. I mean, I would perceive that in our context to mean when we're functioning in that appointed position, like during our meetings, I suppose we shouldn't be advocating, although I don't know how that works in practice, because the whole purpose of the meetings is to
Advocate, I think we can't say, hey, give money to Yes for Killam at this.
Well, in the
In our-
context, there's a work hours.
I'm happy to provide an example that actually comes from a case, right?
Right.
So, for example, you're doing a presentation during one of your meetings, and then there's this PowerPoint slide that says vote yes, right? That's a level of advocacy that you could not engage in as a body.
That's how I take it. I take it as I can say, these are the facts about Killam and the facts about what happens if it passes and the financial impacts if it doesn't pass. I personally, as a taxpayer, am going to vote yes on this, but I can never tell anybody how to vote. I can go and hold signs for a Yes for Killam. I can give my own private funds for Yes for Killam, but I can't host a Yes for Killam meeting where we're asking people for money. That's how I take it.
But we
know-
could,
But we could, right?
host such a meeting.
Okay.
I know, I don't think you
Yeah,
can
they-
because
they
you're a
can.
public official for
We-
campaign finance laws. Can school committee members host a Yes for Killam meeting where they collect funds?
As long as they're not appointed.
That would be depending on where they're posting, like their individual private pages. They have the latitude to engage in fundraising as an individual elected officials. That's not associated with this specific appointing body.
How about hosting an event at their homes?
Yeah, so hosting an event, you could potentially, if that's something that you, let me insert a caveat with all of these, right? If somebody's contemplating a certain action, I would say that we should have a discussion about it, individually offline to talk about the parameters of it. Because it's not as simple as, who's in attendance, how the solicitations are going out, how things are advertised are all factors. So I wouldn't want to give you a unilateral endorsement, yes, go do this, without having a discussion about it.
And there's a difference between what they can do and what we can do.
Absolutely, yeah. If you-
Fundraising theoretically could take place at an event that they host. It could not take place at an event that you host.
That's how I-
But we can attend an event that someone, if I'm attending just as individual person / school committee member, I could attend a fundraising event?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It even says, if I look at the last page of the tab there, it's right, a yes, unless the official is also an appointed official, and we're not appointed in that case, right?
Okay.
Does appointed apply only to the ballot question in question? What if we're appointed for something else? I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I don't know that like Chuck is appointed as a recreation committee member.
And as a voting member.
And is a voting member of the Recreation Committee. Killam technically is not about recreation, it's about schools. However, there's a portion of how we're building Killam that will include fields that might benefit recreation. So how does that play for Chuck?
All right, the Chuck hypothetical, which has a lot of factors there. Actually, I think if you look at the document that was provided, there's actually a hypothetical related to a school building project as well as a member of like the Conservation Commission. I would use that as a touch point. But as it relates to Chuck, Chuck is not a part of the
Killam School.
building.
He's not part of the building committee, nope, he is not.
Yeah. So it would depend on what capacity Chuck is advocating or advertising or promoting that fundraiser. If he's merely attending a fundraiser off hours and not actually engaging in fundraising activity, then that's something that he's allowed to do. And when I say fundraising activity, I mean soliciting funds.
Okay. So if I, sorry, I'm thinking of things I'm most likely to do. So if I was using my personal cell phone and sharing with my personal network that a Yes for Reading, Yes for Killam committee exists, and here's their, link to make a donation if you want to, not saying you have to. Is that fine?
I would want to, it would depend on who, so I don't want to.
I'm sharing it to my own network, just not as a school committee member, as a resident of Reading.
Yeah, I guess it'd be who's in that network, right? Are they, for example, if they were a network of all math teachers, right, that you only have contact information by virtue of your school committee, being a school committee.
No, these would be personal connections.
All right, personal connections, then you would have the ability to engage in such contact.
Okay.
We've thrown all sorts of hypotheticals at you. Justin,
Again,
you're on your feet, on your toes on this one, so.
Yeah.
I don't want to, prior to engaging in something too specific, I'd be happy to have a communication, private communication through the chair or otherwise, if you're concerned about a specific action that you're unclear with. What I would say is, when it comes to a ballot initiative, one way to think about it is replace the ballot initiative with a political campaign, right? In the traditional sense, that it's a person. And if it feels weird to engage in that activity towards a political candidate, maybe it's worth giving us a call, because the ballot initiative is really treated the same, and that's an experience that we more frequently encounter.
Can I, no, of course, my head's going, and I thought I was good until now. As the chair of the building committee, I will offer to both a no for or a yes for committee if they ask for help or resources or plans, or can you answer our questions, or can you come and give us a presentation? Equal access to both a yes for or a no for campaign. Am I allowed to use resources from our designers? I'm assuming that I am. And to talk about the project without talking about voting or telling people how to vote. That's all okay. Providing information to a yes for or a no for campaign.
Providing already public information that exists
Yes.
is absolutely lawful, right? It's public information that already exists, and virtually anybody could request that information by way of a public records request.
They can go right on our website and get it, actually. Is
Exactly.
that available?
And so equal access is very important,
Sure.
right?
And I could go to a yes for or a no for event, even if fundraising is happening, and, but not in my official capacity?
There are a few things happening there. So when you say this is an entirely separate hypothetical than your previous one, right?
Yes.
So you're talking about a fundraising event. If you were going to a fundraising event, we'd want to talk about it beforehand.
Okay. Stay away from money and don't talk about and just go in as a taxpayer.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah, the conservative approach, I would say, and I'll say that I've heard a lot of decisions on these issues, and the guidance has actually changed in the past 20 years or so, to a certain extent. There's changes in administration, whether it be in the Office of Campaign Finance or conflict of interest agencies, right? And so you'll find opinions that may be close to a scenario that you're considering, but maybe not necessarily right spot on. So that's why it's worth having a conversation as to who's involved, what the committee looks like, who's the party that's potentially attending, and what the activity you're actually thinking about engaging in. Do you have any questions as a committee about the use of public resources and what that could entail? I can just tell you some pitfalls where folks have run into issues. That would be, promoting even the date of the ballot initiative. There have been opinions that saying that is atypical to what a school committee normally would do, or any school district does, like, for example, a robocall that promotes the fact that the election is going to happen on a certain day. Folks have gotten in trouble for leafleting in the past. Generally speaking, the information that you should be providing is neutral, and promoting it in a manner that's atypical to your committee's business would be prohibited.
As a whole committee, you're saying, but as individuals, we could do different things, but as a whole committee.
That's correct.
Justin, in your robocall example, if the town does, robocalls or whatever, reverse 911, whatever it is, for every election, that sounds like it wouldn't be deemed as atypical from sort of the normal course of business.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right, if the town were to do a robocall, like a time, place, and location about where the election is.
Yeah.
Where it's different is if the school itself is sending out a message to its audience, right? And it could be perceived as motivating a certain sector of the constituency to get to the polls.
But the
So that
town-
means
the
that
town
Dr.
does-
Milichewski cannot send in his normal weekly communication, he has a normal email that he sends out every Friday, right? He cannot, in that, which only goes to schools, talk about the fact that there's the ballot initiative for Killam on May 13th, and we encourage people to get out and vote.
Agreed. I would discourage you from doing that.
Can I play that one out a little bit too? So if something is in my role as neutral, seemingly as neutral as, there's, people have asked the community ask questions about the Killam School building project. Therefore, more information about the project can be found on killamschool.com. Seems pretty neutral, right? I mean, I guess you can say, since I'm giving them access to, it's all publicly accessible resources. I would also, couldn't I argue that the election date is also publicly accessible information too? So by me saying that there's, also the election date is at this time, I mean.
We have a pretty robust communications group that the information gets sent out on school networks, on town networks, on social media networks throughout the town, by mail, by reverse 911 calls.
Justin, isn't there a distinction here between, political or election-related activity and sort of standard informational activity? Like the school building committee doesn't have to cease publishing minutes and, document, I mean, we can't cease doing those things. Like, those are normal course of business, for the entity. It's specifically communications related to, the presence of the ballot initiative and the vote and things like that, sounds like you're cautioning us against.
Correct.
Yeah. So we can still,
I still don't, I'm going to push back on you because it's a step in the process, right? We're following the MSBA process, and throughout the process, we've communicated where we're at, and this is just another step in the process. That's how.
I'm sorry.
It's just another step in the process, right?
We're questioning why, if it's a fact that there's an election happening in the town on May 13th, that everyone who's a registered voter is invited to that election, that information is widely and publicly available, why is it not okay for that to go in like school newsletters? By the way, there's not an emphasis on what to vote, just at 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on May 13th at the field house, there's an election. Because to be honest, there's going to be a second ballot question likely if this all happens, so the school won't even be the only thing on the ballot.
Yeah, if you look at it's actually right in the guidance document. It's, the idea is that if the superintendent or somebody were to just direct that communication to these folks, and it's really atypical for the types of, for example, there are many elections that occur, and if you were to But this one that's particularly related to the ballot initiative, that's of some value or some specific interest to people that have a political position on it, right? It'd be perceived potentially as motivating a certain sect of the electorate to get to the polls as opposed to others, right? I agree with you that, a normal communication or a normal notice, meeting minutes, documents, or documentation about a particular event is not an issue. It's the promotion of that information that's atypical from what you've done, because you're treating it differently because it's a ballot initiative, is what the Office of Campaign Finance would say.
I guess the only other thing I'd want to explore is I see what you're saying, but I also see what Carla's saying is like all along, we've talked about the various phases of the process and like it kind of on the end of all of our, not the end, and, kind of 2/3 through the way of all of our graphics are the town vote on, XYZ date, and then all what would happen after that. So all along, I think we've been in all of our communications talking about that there's a town vote spring this date too. So I guess it would be atypical for me to say there's an election at the high school on this date. That would be atypical. But is it atypical for me, as I talk about the process, to bring up that there is the part of the process is there's a town vote? No, I think that's been something we've been communicating all along. I guess what I can do is I don't mind also drafting what I think would be, try my best to stay within what I think the confines are, run it by your office and see if you had any concerns or feedback or things that you would sort of allow me or not allow me to do. It sounds like maybe if I give something more concrete, we can react to that.
Absolutely, and it's, the big thing here is the method and manner of the communication,
Yep.
right?
And the client, the group that it's going to.
distribution.
So the distribution of it, and in terms of social media now, where we're not just putting information out to people, parents of school-age children, we are putting it out on Facebook, we're putting it out on Twitter and other platforms where people who want access can have access to the schools if they choose to. And
And I want to be specific, when you say we, you mean the building committee, right?
no, I'm talking about the school district. We have a
Okay.
Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have all that stuff that we use to promote anything going on in the schools. So it's not a closed system where an older person in the community who wants to be informed about what's going on in the schools, they can have access to that information over social media. So it's not excluding a group of people. It's more townwide.
I would say the other thing I keep hearing was atypical, right? So if we go back to some of the, your letters from every last election we've had, you've probably noted there's a townwide election that's on this date, right? So if we have a track record of notifying of elections, and I even think the high school one.
I was going to say,
Yes,
definitely the high school and Rise.
We'll do
we
that as
talk
well
about
because it
parking.
impacts parking and impacts other things, right?
Yep.
So let's use that as part of the.
There is potentially a difference, channeling Justin here. I think there would potentially be a difference between alerting the newsletter distribution that there is an election
Yep.
and impact parking, et cetera, and then saying there's an election that includes a vote on the Killam project, right? Which, so certainly,
Wording
is
matters.
that fair? There's a distinction there?
I hear,
Yes, there's a distinction.
think if you're the person who does not want to pay more taxes for the schools, right? And you say, hey, it's not fair that they're using
Yeah.
their, they're, on work hours, they're exploiting their
Distribution.
network.
I hear you.
Those are the
But
people
for
we're
me-
protecting against.
For me, the key is that our communications don't just go to that network, that they go out on social media where other people have access
Yeah.
to it. That's my key, is that it's not just that network.
Open
It's-
platforms.
It's open to others.
So
It's-
yeah,
it's a
I like
combination
the
of these
idea of you
factors.
sort of
The draft is
considering
working.
what you might send.
The other thing to mention, which may play a role, Justin knows more than me, is we do also in the schools talk about things that don't relate to the school sometimes about the town happening. Like I have in plenty of times put out communications around events happening at the senior center or events happening, other things too, that are just more community-based too. So yeah, I'll definitely send some draft of some things and make sure that Justin and Colby and the team have eyes on it and then we follow, appropriate protocols.
Okay. All right, this topic I think we've hit pretty hard.
Yep.
Justin, thank you for your time. Appreciate you hopping on. Very much, very, very helpful. Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
If you have any specific questions, happy to talk through the issues a little bit more. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
And committee, if anybody needs to talk to him about any individual concerns, just let me know. I'll send his number to you as well. Okay? Thanks, Justin. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, which is the budget itself. Not Killam or anything else around Killam, but the budget. So any discussion, any question, any topics of concern, or anything else that people want to raise? You guys are a vibrant bunch tonight. Get you talking about legal stuff and you're all good. Start talking about money and you zip up.
The vote is at the next meeting?
The local
vote-
budget.
The vote is at the next meeting,
We
yes.
got to talk about it last week.
I know. I'll just, I'm going to alert one thing, and I asked Dr. Milczewski and team to run some numbers on it. You may or may not be aware that there is a bill at the state level that is essentially a minimum wage bill for both teachers and staff. Theoretically, that would go into law if it is signed this time for this budget cycle we're talking about, the 25-26 budget cycle. So we've looked at that just to understand what it might mean. Obviously, we haven't planned for that in this budget. And theoretically, that law says we'd be paid back after the year had happened, so after we'd spent the additional money. But we can't go negative either, so. Anyway, just FYI, we have looked at that number. It's not a small number in any way, shape, or form, but it's out there. So
We have that many people that don't make minimum wage
it's not a minimum wage number.
Okay.
It's a
relative to minimum.
it's the MIT living wage
Okay.
type conversation, and there's a lot. Yeah, I'm not going to get into all the details,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
there's a lot of other interesting points about the law that it's very cut and dry, and as we know, many of the staffing positions are not cut and dry. So there's a lot of questions that would have to be answered.
And this is supposed to be reimbursement from the state.
Correct.
And if the state has, the state has a lot of things in front of them now that they have to pay back to the federal government. I just don't see that state is going to be able to cover this mandate for us in a timely manner.
Does it,
We'll see. There's a lot of, we'll see. Go ahead, Chuck.
is it impact collective bargaining agreements or non?
It essentially asserts an override of collective bargaining agreements.
Really?
Yep,
I guess I'll have to look into that.
yep.
Won't be your problem.
Sean's like, aren't you glad?
Oh, man.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see what happens if it comes to fruition, but it is clearly not part of this budget as we've cast it so far. So if it does come, we'll have to adjust and roll with the punches and figure things out. But in the meantime, it's not part of this budget. Okay? Anything else?
Just, I want to go back to the question on kind of the first budget topic around the Killam project as well. I did just quickly pull up the notes from last night too, that the 2.2 from town meeting, the 2.2 for feasibility study is included in the total project cost. And actually, if you look at, it's on page 10 of the packet from last night, it also looks at out of the $42 million reimbursement, 1.13 of that would be from the original 2.2. So I guess that's good news.
I probably have it right here in this document that I can't.
That's the one I pulled it out of right there. It's right in the top of that
I
too.
think we've already started getting reimbursed for.
We have,
We have,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah, yeah.
like 400,000 or something like that.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Any other budget topics, conversations? Going once, going twice? Do I have another motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Nobody's seconded, so.
Please don't second. Can I raise a, not for discussion, but a topic for sort of potentially future discussion? We used to
Sure.
do that once upon a time. You triggered it with the thought about, or with the comment about the state law. Either for the policy subcommittee or potentially for the technology impact committee, there's a state law in the works which would essentially require districts to pass a policy banning the use of cell phones in the classroom. Whether that state law passes or not, I think we should at least have a conversation about it in the appropriate forum. So just want to throw that out there for it to find its way to somewhere appropriate.
Okay. My first read on that would be, that might be one that we want to follow the, what does the school committee think they want before we go towards policy committee? And we might want to get some feedback from staff and principals in particular before we make any other further
I
conversations.
raised it because we're obviously about to kick off the Technology Impact Committee, so I thought it might be a useful input, or, you know, in whatever direction that goes, you know, we would certainly want to get input there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So we can potentially put that in for February or something like that as a conversation point, at least if we have enough data points by then.
Great.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Now there is a motion on the table that hasn't been seconded.
Second.
Seconded by Carla. So the motion to adjourn is now seconded, not debatable. Chuck?
Yes.
All right, we don't have to do roll call. All in favor? All opposed? And none. It passes 5-0. We are adjourned at 8 PM.